G'day folks, welcome back to our Wednesday webcast. We've been pumping out bits of information that we hope will be useful to people around the planet. At the moment, live on this call, we've got people from Seattle and the Philippines, and listening to the recording, folks from all around Australia and other parts of the globe as well. We started off thinking about dealing with COVID from a purely, survival mindset mode, and how do we handle the crisis part of it. And we've seen that response beginning to taper off at different rates for different types of families and businesses and different countries around the world. So we turned our focus a little bit more to recovery. So what does this look like as we begin to emerge? Australia is just beginning now in the last week or so to roll back some of our lockdown restrictions, as are our cousins across the ditch in New Zealand. Other countries are still well and truly in the thick of it, and or still ratcheting up the level of lockdown that they're in. And so our interest at the moment is, how do we come out of a lockdown state in the best possible shape, whether that's us as individuals or as leaders or as businesses? How do we connect to the people around us, given that we've had this kind of artificial separation? It's community in a very different way to how we're used to doing it. And it seemed to me to be a really opportune time to invite Rachel Callander into the conversation. Rachel's a good friend of mine. We have met through a mutual mentor that we have here in Australia. She is award-winning on just about every front that she chooses to step foot in, which includes keynote speaking and art and photography and writing. One of the things that I genuinely love about Rach is her ability to capture a room or a community through the mediums that she uses. I've had the pleasure of hearing her speak, and she's one of the most moving speakers that I've ever heard. And it was a beautiful experience. Many people who can move you with words, it's a superficial experience that brushes lightly across emotion, or it's actively crafted to press particular buttons. Rachel speaks with deep authenticity and with a wealth of lived experience, both personally and in the work that she does. I reckon a great way to introduce you, Rach, is just to read a little bit from your website, a quote from Nathan Scalaro, the editor of Dumbo Feather, who interviewed you a while back. I think it's a great snapshot. You're a difficult person to introduce because there's so much to you, and I think this does a reasonable job of kind of capturing that complexity and wonder. Although she's experienced profound grief and loss, she has seen humanity and abundance in typically unseen places and told people to look, to pay attention. When she speaks, you can hear joy and pain all at once. This is clearly someone who has felt the extremes of life and held the tension. While she works closely with words and advocates for more empowering language to be used in healthcare, she also believes there is more to communication than what we say. That's one of the lessons her daughter Evie taught her, that when we quiet the mind and feel the connection, there's actually an entire conversation going on right there between our bodies. Rach, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, likewise, Mike. I love chatting to you, and it's nice to have some more people to chat with as well. And thanks for joining us from all over the world, as you've said, Mike. Hopefully this is just a space where we can throw some ideas around and create a bit of meaning and be honest with each other, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I like that. So one of the observations, I guess, if we dive into this from the point of view of, I've certainly seen businesses doing it, and I've also noticed it in individual communications, sometimes in intimate relationships and more broad social ones. There's a sense that when we're under pressure, we really easily retreat to a reactive space, to being defensive or aggressive and trying to hold our position. And it very rarely works from a communication and connection point of view.
Yeah.
As we're sort of emerging from this, we're having to almost reconnect with people, get used to being back face to face with each other. For businesses, they're trying to reconnect with their tribes and communities, and back to a commercial footing, I guess.
Mm.
And through all of those relationships, there's a need to move beyond that sort of reactive sense, I suppose.
Yeah.
What are you noticing around that, and then we can get into, I guess, a little bit about what can we do about it to navigate communication really well?
Yeah, look, I've even noticed it in myself in my own personal life.
Yeah,
And it does, when we're feeling reactive or we're feeling uncertain or in a space of anxiety and not knowing what's coming up, and there's fear around all of that uncertainty, we do react. And the behaviors of uncertainty come across as being things, from a whole spectrum, from rage to anger to frustration to being kind of, having a short wick, or being snappy in my case, or stressy. And you just feel tightly wound, and then nothing seems to flow like it used to. It's almost like you kind of become stuck, and then these behaviors just kind of cycle through you, and it's a horrible space to be in. But I think what's happening is we're not acknowledging that we're afraid. I think that's at the heart of a lot of the communication issues for a lot of us. We're deeply afraid, and we're grieving. There's been a lot of loss in our world and in each other's personal lives, and globally there's a lot of loss and a lot of grief. But maybe we're not naming it, we're not acknowledging it, and we're not kind of sitting with it as a team or as a group or within relationships. And I think that brings a barrier to moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. I like that piece about naming it. There's certainly a very well evidenced piece of work in the world of psychology as it relates to survival around being able to articulate your emotional state, and not to necessarily indulge it, although there's definitely times and places for that, but just to acknowledge it and almost springboard off it, because emotion can give us energy, can't it? That's if we can turn it to something effective, it can be a powerful connector and a powerful source of energy and motivation.
Yeah.
I'm interested. A lot of your work's with medical professionals, and particularly, one of your big passions is that in the space of families who are really early in the stages of hearing dire diagnoses and labels for their children, which is an experience that you have personally had, and one that's almost, I've reflected on that, and you can kind of imagine what it might be like, but I'm guessing that's one of those things that's pretty difficult to actually connect with the full enormity of that unless you've been there. And the medical profession is a great one for almost by necessity, perhaps distancing themselves from the kinds of things that they're communicating. They wrap it up in all kinds of language, technical language, and perhaps for them a fear is, I don't want to feel this too much because it would be difficult to keep being effective in my job. Plus they're often under a heap of pressure too, tight deadlines and many other people to see.
Yeah.
How do you, in those kinds of moments where we feel the need for protection, whether it's a consciously thought through thing, or whether it's just a sense that, I'm locking down into myself reactively a bit, what can we do to open that up to connect more meaningfully and wholeheartedly?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Mike. And this is some work that I do with health professionals as well in a workshop setting to create strategies around communicating effectively without kind of being lost emotionally in the trauma of another person's experience. And I think this is broader than just the health profession. It's for everyone going through all sorts of things. And
of course,
I've created kind of a framework because often when we don't know what's happening or we don't have any answers, sometimes the only thing and the first thing we can do is just ask more questions.
Mm.
It's because we have a lot of wisdom and knowledge within us that often goes untapped. And when it's kind of squashed by fear and anxiety, we lose that ability to deeply connect with the wisdom that we hold within us. And so these questions is kind of like a way of really opening ourselves up to find that wisdom and to help us move forward. And so the 4 kind of overarching questions are questions around what are you proud of? And to me, these kind of questions are not just that one question, what are you proud of, but questions like, what have you achieved in your life? Like, what's made you happy? What's made you have a sense of meaning in your life, a sense of purpose? Like, what do you really enjoy about your life? Like, it connects to the humanity of who you are. And if you're asking it for somebody else, it connects you to the humanity of them. It's kind of a way to say, you know, we are the same. Our experiences might be different, but the things that we're proud of connect us because I can understand that feeling. I can sense that pride, or I can imagine that happening to me. So it brings that sense of humanity in the room. And so when I'm talking to health professionals, this for me is a way for them to kind of see the humanity of the other person instead of blocking themselves off emotionally and just giving really difficult information. It's like, here's a human being. Let's treat them as such. And so I've done this in a workshop, and together in a room, we've come up with, 30 different ways of asking the same question. And it's really powerful when you can imagine yourself answering these deeply powerful questions. I want to read a few out, actually, just from some of the ones that we've gone through, just as a way to kind of connect you guys that are listening to this kind of question. So questions like, what have you achieved? What have you enjoyed? What are the lessons you've already learned? Like, what have you already learned to bring you to this point today? What have you already endured in your life that makes you realize that you can endure today as well? What is your favorite memory? What is the biggest success of your life? When have you found peace with a decision or action? If you can travel in time, or if you could travel in time, what would you not change? And I love that.
What a great question.
Isn't that cool? I love that. And this kind of just helps you become deeply reflective and tap into those things that I said that you already know within you and hold within you that can help unstick you and kind of get you out of that I'm so frazzled and overwhelmed and afraid that those feelings of rage and frustration just keep circling within you. But this is a way to kind of pause that emotion and take a breath and kind of help unstick you.
So just springboard off that a bit, Rach, and so, I did a bit of work with some emergency response folks in Perth just this morning, and we were pretty much talking about this exact territory from the perspective of, when we've got a bias for something. So whether it's I see you in a particular way, or I have a view of the world that is a particular way. Our tendency is, humans as meaning-making machines, to kind of look for evidence to prove that what we think is true is actually true, and almost discount anything to the contrary. And questions are a super powerful way of skirting elegantly around our blind spots and seeing things differently. The challenge, I think, and it's a tricky thing to switch on for people, I'd love to get your take on it, is that to me, the key to all of this is curiosity. So I could ask you any one of those questions, but with no curiosity, and the question would be hollow. The only way it's going to have validity is if I'm genuinely curious. Dr. Phil said once, ages ago, that 80% of questions are statements in disguise. We often ask a question, we're leading the witness almost, So do you really think that's a good idea? I'm not actually asking you a question. I'm saying you're an idiot. Don't do that, So how, I think this is a real challenge. I certainly find it a challenge for myself. And when you're in that space of feeling defensive or aggressive or reactive, fearful, to activate that kind of curiosity kind of requires us to climb out of that sort of primate part of ourselves and get a bit more into the thinking part of ourselves. Have you got any tips about that in actual moments where you can almost feel yourself?
Oh my gosh, and I've had so many of those, and my poor partner.
Oh, I think it's human, isn't it?
It is human. I think that's the thing, we're so afraid of, I guess, revealing these parts of our humanity, especially in a workspace where it's
Yes.
often judged. But I think the more that we can, I guess, allow that openness and vulnerability when it comes to emotions, not when it's hurting somebody else, but kind of for someone to just stop and go, you know what, this behavior is really destructive. I'm wondering if there's something going on for you. You know, are you afraid of anything? But it's tricky because as humans, we are wired to seek comfort over conflict.
Yeah.
And it is that seeking of comfort, like trying to get away from whatever it is that's making us uncomfortable into something else that might be destructive, is our default, rather than kind of getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I guess that's where you can learn the most. In terms of kind of that curiosity piece, it comes down to you. If you're in the communication space or you're working with teams, and communication is a huge part of your culture's success or a person's well-being, especially in the health profession, it has to come from a heart attitude first. Like, it can't just be words. You know, people can feel when you're being ungenuine from a mile away. And it's almost like we've got this external situation that happens to us. You know, COVID-19, it's externally happened. And then internally, there's something else going on for us as well. And because of this external situation, we're now feeling afraid and disrupted. But there's another layer on top of that, which is a philosophical layer. And depending on what that is, will determine on how we react and respond to ourselves and to other people. So if the philosophical belief within this whole situation is that everything is screwed and I'm never going to find my way out again, that overarching belief of everything is lost is going to flow through every interaction. And so that fear is going to remain a key piece of our experience. But if somebody else can have the same experience, you know, the same external situation, the internal belief could be, this is an opportunity. And the philosophical belief is that I'm going to be okay in this situation. It completely changes that experience. So I think it's about really understanding what you internally make something mean, and then the overarching philosophical belief. You know, our mutual friend and our mentor, Matt Church, often says, you know, that there's a situation, you know, what happened? What did you make it mean? And what was it really about?
Yeah.
And being able to ask those questions, I think that's one of the most powerful pieces of communication I've ever experienced. And yeah, it's true, because we make things mean things that aren't necessarily true.
Yeah. I love what Brené Brown has to say about that. You know, she says, let me test drive my first draft of this story on you. Yeah. So, you know, you've said something to me, I've reacted to it, and it's like my reaction is my first draft of the story. Here's the story I'm telling about our interaction. You know, it means that you're cruel or you're uncaring or that you don't, you know, that you are discrediting me or judging me or whatever. And if I share that with you, the other person can go, hang on a minute, that's actually not what's going on at all, or at least not in my mind. I think what you're talking about, it touches on a couple of points for me that have been big topics over the arc of this COVID situation. So one is resilience. Yeah. And, you know, a few of my clients asked me early on to help them build resilience, and it's kind of like, it's not the time, you know. That's a bit like turning up to the start of an ultra marathon and saying, can you help me get fit for this? Like the start line's a bit late. And I think this communication territory is similar, that and I love what you had to say about being comfortable with discomfort. The more that we lean into that space intentionally, deliberately and frequently, the more versed we get at navigating and understanding our internal terrain, and that builds resilience, it builds capability and skill around curiosity. The time to start practicing is not when you're right in the middle of something that's got heavy duty consequences attached to it and where everybody's under the pump. You kind of need to have arrived at that moment with a bit of art. So one thing I'm encouraging people to do is use this opportunity, I guess, to remind them that we can all experience things that drop us into a moment that can be short or really long, where we're surrounded by uncertainty and disruption. And because of that, let's get good at building our capability for dealing with them.
Yeah, I love that.
Awesome. So you mentioned 4 types of questions, and we went down the rabbit hole on question 1. So
great. Yeah, so we sort of covered the first one, that what are you proud of, and thinking of a whole lot of different ways of asking that sort of question to connect to the humanity of either ourselves or somebody else or our team. It's really nice if you're working in a team to do this as a group and get a collective sense of, as a group, what are you proud of? And it kind of builds that connection again. Like when you're talking about connection, we're coming back together, you know, maybe this is a really nice way of reintegration. Is like, we need to start with the humanity of each person, and that often begins with what is the same about us, like what are we proud of, what do we achieve.
Great way to reflect on, you know, what we did in crisis management mode that we want to take forward into the new future too.
Exactly. It's really revealing, and it's a beautiful way of getting people on a similar page. Yeah, it's really nice. The second question is, what do you hope for? And questions around kind of future thinking. And to me, this really taps into the dignity of a person or the dignity of a team, like talking about who are you, what do you hope for, what are your values, what is a meaningful life to you. And I'll go through a few of them. There's so many different ways, you know, what are you looking forward to? What does better look like? What do you see when you close your eyes? If you let go of what you think is possible, what would your life look like? What gives you hope? What will you tell your grandchildren in 20 years from now? That this is from kind of groups that I've worked with, you know, it's quite beautiful. Yeah, what are your values? And to me, this is another beautiful thing to do in a team, because that kind of sets the aspirational identity of people moving forward, and what they want to carry with them, and what they are proud of and what they've achieved and what they don't want to let go of, but they want to kind of be more of. And it's really permission giving when everyone's like, this is what I believe in deeply. This is what I want. This is my vision. This is what I want to see us work towards. And then when people can go, yeah, me too, or what about this and that, like it is that aspirational, positive, energy giving force that I think unites a group, a team, a relationship.
Yeah, and I love the framing of it, Rach. So you know, you often see teams in processes of connection or planning asking questions about the ideal future or the future state or something like that, and that's what you end up with is a conversation that's relatively sterile and is quite almost ring-fenced by the notion of what's possible, and even that's constrained by perspective. Whereas what do you hope for kind of it's so much more all-encompassing and expansive. I love the way that's framed.
Yeah, and
I think you're right, it taps that humanity too. It's like we all have things that we hope for, so it's got an element of the sort of essence of us in amongst it, as opposed to just a cerebral brain dump about well, it could look like this.
Exactly. And it's not about being fluffy and overly hopeful, and it can still be quite realistic as well, but it brings in that curiosity space. Like even when you're thinking about hope or future or visions or things, like it just creates I guess bigger conversations, more open-hearted, open-minded ways of thinking and being with each other when you're actually allowed to talk about those things.
And look, from a resilience point of view, it's tactically ultra powerful too. So there's a piece in the survival psychology, the personality traits that help people stack the deck in their favour regardless of how badly things are going. People who survive against the odds, basically. Jim Collins described it as the Stockdale paradox in Good to Great. So this thing of holding on to the hope that you will prevail in the end, while at the same time looking deeply into the reality that's confronting you.
Yeah.
And for me, practical and tangible hope is about, it's like an attitude to something, you know. It's we will grab hold of the steering wheel and wrestle this thing somehow in a direction where the outcome is a good one.
Yeah.
even though there is nothing about the circumstance that suggests that it will be.
Yeah.
It's an act of will almost, and can be held in tension with, this may not end well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what, just to reflect, I think this is a nice segue to reflect on my own personal journey. You mentioned earlier at the beginning in the intro, my little daughter Evie. For you who are listening there, she was born with a very rare chromosome condition. The doctors had never seen it before, and so there was a lot of big, scary information that was given to me early on in my world as being a new mum. And this question of what do I hope for my child was really different, I guess, to what the health professionals wanted to treat her like. And so this is where my work has kind of come, where when values are misaligned, especially when expertise get involved, what the health professionals wanted, because she wasn't reaching traditional milestones, they wanted her walking and standing and all the rest, because that's what she should be doing at her age at 2 years old. And Evie was nowhere near able to do that. So we had all this equipment, that for me was, it seemed archaic and metallic, and I hated putting her in this horrible frame. And in the end, I said to my health professionals, I'd rather that she has a quality of life and her independence, because how she really loves moving is lying on the floor on her back and scooting around. But can you help me make this safe for her? Because the way that she was doing it wasn't actually safe. So when they listened to what I was hoping for, and they could then align their expertise with what I really valued, that's where real care comes into the space. That's where active compassion and listening and quality of life and healing can happen, when expertise and knowledge of both parties are seen and heard and valued. And it's really powerful, because often in this space, people really want to help you, but if they assume they know what you need, and it's not what you need, then they're giving you things that are wasted. And that's when things like compassion fatigue, especially in the health sector, comes in. It's like they're doing their best, they're trying to fix everything, but if the person hasn't said, this is what I actually want, this is not what I hope for, it's a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And
questions.
You see that right across the arc of business, I think, as well. It's particularly poignant in a place where there's lives involved in the way that it is in the medical space. But we see this all the time, people connecting with what they hope will be a customer and just going straight into sales pitch mode. And it's like, you don't even know who I am. How do you know if this will fit? Or, a potential customer asks a question and they just give a canned answer. Here's one I prepared earlier. And it's like ships passing each other in the night. There's something really profound about understanding that. And it'd be magical, wouldn't it, if businesses were able to ask of their customers, what do you hope for?
I think so. So. Yeah, and it is really powerful, because often we do assume things and we make judgments, and it's just human nature, but it's kind of, we need to be aware and to catch ourselves before that happens, and to kind of get into the practice of thinking through these kind of different ways of asking questions and having that curiosity, because that's when we can actually give our expertise in a way that's going to be really meaningful to the other person. And then the next piece of the puzzle, the third question, are questions around what are you afraid of? And this is very it's quite a full-on question, and it's not one that is asked lightly, and you need those other two first. You can't just jump in with this one. There needs to be a bit of a relationship and trust kind of built, because it's really a very vulnerable question. But when you can really tap into what a person is afraid of and really deeply listen and kind of hold that space with the person, it is so profound. And I think that's when so much care and relationship building and good business practice can come in. And I just want to read you a few from other pieces and other workshops that we've come up with, because they're really good. And I can't remember them all off by heart. But there are a lot of questions, and this comes up in the health profession. Again, we actually get health professionals to really think about patients and the kind of fears that they might have. So questions like, how will I survive this? What if I can't cope? What about other people? How will they cope? These are the kind of fears that people are carrying unspoken, which little triggers can push them into those fear behaviors, rage, frustration, reaction, anxiety, arrogance even. Where do you feel resistance to go to? What are you most concerned about? What's holding you back? What keeps you awake at night? What gives you butterflies in your stomach? How do you feel when you've faced your fear? Really beautiful ways of asking these things. And I remember when I was asked this by my own health professionals with my little daughter, what are you afraid of? And I was so glad they asked me, because Evie's condition was quite terrifying and sent us to hospital a lot, and often where her life was hanging in the balance, and it was extremely traumatic. But when they actually asked me, what are you afraid of? My biggest fear was her vomiting and choking and aspirating and not breathing, and me not being there to kind of catch it. And so they listened to this deep fear, and they sent me home one day with 2 pieces of equipment, which was like a sucker machine and an oxygen machine. And the sucker was to kind of scoop out all the goo, and the oxygen was I could just stick it on her nose, and she was given this oxygen. So at the very least, it would buy us some time to keep Evie alive while the ambulance came, because this was a regular occurrence in my life for a year or 2. But when they listened to my deep fears and they gave us this equipment, it kept us out of hospital, and it meant that we could actually manage at home. Like, it was so effective. These 2 pieces of equipment was so effective in helping me cope with Evie and helping her clear her goo and get her oxygen and manage her at home, that it reduced the cost of care, for one, which is a big deal in the health industry. But it made me feel like somebody was really listening to what I deeply, deeply valued. And that's a powerful piece, because often we're so afraid of revealing our fears and our vulnerabilities, because we think that fear is a sign of weakness. But I think acknowledging fear is the biggest sign of courage that we possibly have. And when it is shared and heard and held together, it's just the most beautiful thing we can do for each other as humans, is to kind of listen to our fears and acknowledge them, make them heard. And it almost makes fear a lot smaller. It comes back to that piece when we name it, when we can say, this is what I'm afraid of. And even just speaking it out can be incredibly healing.
Totally agree. It's there's so much in just that short piece, where you could imagine you going home with exactly the same equipment off the back of, here's what you need for your family, take this machine and off you go, here's how you use it. And it could potentially even add to fear and complexity, but giving you that off the back of a profound connecting conversation about what was uppermost on your mind actually has the complete opposite effect. It becomes a process of empowerment and liberation and relative ease. I think there's a danger. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world, but certainly here in Australia, for a long time we were quite big on the sort of language around, just harden up, walk it off, no fear, all that sort of stuff. And to me, it's very counterproductive space, because as you said, it's deeply courageous, I think, to acknowledge what we fear. And in fact, without fear, courage, there is no such thing as courage. We don't need it in times we're not afraid. And there's something, I think it's a bit like any emotion. Any emotion that is unacknowledged tends to grow and morph into its extreme. So, if we suppress anger, it tends to become rage. If we suppress sadness, it tends to become depression. If we suppress fear, it tends to become just overwhelming panic. And when we get into those extremes of emotion, it's very difficult to be effectively functional, and much easier to feel like an island, disconnected and alone. It's interesting too. I've spoken quite deeply at times with crisis response organisations, fireys and some military people and oil response teams. and particularly some of the most elite military people are actually quite good at this stuff. And it's kind of counterintuitive. You'd think they'd just be like, tough through it. But they're actually very good at acknowledging fear and using it as a way of ensuring that their plans and tactics are actually robust and that they can stay functioning at the highest level of their training. So, that's one of the things I like to say to particularly tough Aussie blokes that go, nah, don't worry about emotion. So, well, if it's good enough for the elite military people, then maybe we need a slice of it too.
It's a huge connector. If we think of some of the characters that we love in movies, the kind of hero type characters, that show a lot of courage and bravery, often those characters have a weakness and their weakness is shared. And it's because when we see the weakness in the whole spectrum and we see what it's taken to kind of bring them to that space of courage, it's like, you're like me, you're like me, I'm capable of this too, because you haven't just come in as some all-powerful macho, show no fear, just get the job done. And it's not real, so we can't connect to that. But when we can connect to, okay, here's a person that I admire or I really respect, and they're going through fear and they're acknowledging it, like, oh, thank goodness they're just like me. We spend so much time kind of hiding our flaws and our imperfections and the things that we're afraid of, and that just creates a disconnect and a barrier.
Yes.
Really, to be human and to, I guess, have the impact that we wanted in the first place.
So we've got about 4 minutes to run, and we haven't hit question 4 yet. So let's dive into that.
Question 4 is, what do you need? So once you've kind of gone through, what are you proud of? What do you hope for? Afraid of? What do you need? And again, this is a really beautiful thing to do in a team. And when we've done it in teams as a workshop, it's been so profound, the kind of the answers that the group has come up with together. And then that becomes their own personal framework in which to move forward with, which is so brilliant. So what do you need? How can I help? These are the sort of questions you can ask, what skills do you have or that I can help you with to grow? What resources do you already have? What's already worked in your life and how can we build on that? That's a great one for health professionals. What would make your life easier? What do you need from me? What is one thing that will get you there? What can I offer you? Who's around you? And maybe a good way to kind of wrap this kind of piece up is, I've got this beautiful quote. It's a poem actually that I'd like to read you guys. It's by David White and it's called Start Close In. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing. Close in. The step you don't want to take. Start with the ground you know, the pale ground beneath your feet. Your own way to begin the conversation. Start with your own question. To hear another's voice, follow your own voice. Wait until that voice becomes an intimate private ear that can really listen to another. Start right now. Take a small step you can call your own. Don't follow someone else's heroics. Be humble and focused. Start close in. Don't mistake that other for your own. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing. Close in. The step you don't want to take. I love that. And I think it kind of wraps everything up, start with the first thing. And what is that first thing? And maybe it's acknowledging everything that's gone before to this moment. What are you proud of? And then think about, what do you hope for? What about the future? And there might be things that are scary when you think about the future. Name them, write them. What are you afraid of? And then what do you need? What can help you begin that first step? And I think when we kind of break it all down into just one thing after the next, we're more likely to get to where we want to go rather than rushing off into a future, into step 20. We're so good at wanting future things and in our head imagining big, shiny future without acknowledging here we are and this is valuable right now. And this first step is brave and courageous and it has to be taken.
Awesome, Rach. What a great wrap to a beautiful sequence of questions, and I love the way they build on each other. I think particularly under pressure, there's almost that desire to jump straight to solutions, and this is really reversing that around and getting getting to solutions via a process of deep communication and connection, which is so powerful. I feel like we could talk about this all day. There's so many. I'm left with many questions and many rabbit holes I'd love to go down.
No.
And maybe depending on if people out there would like to hear more of this conversation, let us know, and we'll do a part 2. But thank you very much for your time and for your insights from your professional and your personal experience. If people want to find you, Rach, where can they do that?
My website, rachelcallander.com. Callander's a funny spelling. It's like the Scottish town. It's like Callander with double L's and A-N-D-E-R. But rachelcallander.com. You can find me there.
Cool, and we'll include that link in when we post this out as well for people.
Yeah, and I've got a workbook that I often take health professionals through and different businesses through that kind of go through some of these questions and some of my other tools around communication and language. So if anyone is interested in that, then send me an email and I'll send you a copy of my worksheets and workbook.